is going to be moderated by, there's only one person in the room that is almost as famous as Lenny Chesel. Almost. And that's Gary Beach. So Gary is well known in the CIO world, and he's also been a good friend of the CIO Council. I think he told us earlier, he's been here, I think, 9 times. He's been our keynote, He's been our keynote a number of times, and has been a good friend of the CIO Council. Comes down every year and enlightens us. So today, he's going to be helping, and he's going to be moderating our CIO panel. So if you don't know Gary, I'll give you a little bit of a background on him. He's well known in the CIO and tech leadership circles. He's worked in the technology and media industry since 1981, serving in management roles with McGraw-Hill and IDG. You've heard him associated with CIO Magazine as a publisher emeritus for CIO Magazine. You've seen his work in Computer World and in Network World. If you still have your Computer World or Network World subscriptions, or you read CIO Magazine. His current focus is on the state of STEM education in America, and he also publishes a blog on CIO.com. I would encourage you all the CIOs and just tech in general to take a look at that, titled Science and Math Imperative, addressing the issue. So, for the past 10 years, he's written a column in the print edition of CIO Magazine, for those who still get the print edition, and handled news and information requests from the media. You've seen him on Squawk Box. You've seen him on Closing Bell. He was involved with NPR and Morning Edition and All Things Considered. So certainly, we are very, very fortunate to have him here. Again, great friend and just a really knowledgeable guy. So please help me give Gary a hand. Gary Beach.
Well, thank you for that introduction. The real stars are to my right, your left. And we're going to dive deeply into CK's presentation, which I thought was provocative and very, very informative. In fact, when I was thinking this morning, how many here watched The Voice? Right. I was going to turn the chairs around and say, who wants CK on their team? The guys all turn around, and everybody turned around, so it'd be redundant. So it was not necessary. But before I introduce our guest panel, I did want to comment on a couple of things. Charles mentioned earlier today that it's the anniversary of Pi. Today is also the 29th anniversary of the World Wide Web. And Tim Berners-Lee, like Warren Buffett does an annual letter. Tim Berners-Lee on the anniversary of the web every year does an annual letter. And when CK was presenting and talking about China and Russia and all the others, the biggest worry that Tim Berners-Lee has now is the weaponization of the web. Mainly the FANG group, the bigger companies that have so much of it, it becomes an easy target. So that's something that worries me. And Steve mentioned, talking about security and pins, there's a technology called IPv6. If we could embed 128 bits into our ARM or what have you, we would need pins. Pins are a pain, anyway. So, and then just lastly, Joe Robbins. I was very impressed with the security. Thank you, Sanjay. The outreach that this community is doing to schools. It's very, very impressive, and it's hard to be here in South Florida and know what it's like around the rest of the country. This is one of the more active organizations that I've seen in STEM Rapid. So I want to congratulate all of you, because those 22 scholarships truly are the next CIOs. And Joe also mentioned something that's very close to me. And he mentioned the quality of the public school teachers in this region and how outstanding they are. And that's another round of applause. But before we get started, I would argue or advocate that the biggest challenge facing our country in the next 10 years is where, and all of us in this room have a responsibility to do this, where are we going to find the 50% of public school teachers who are going to retire? Because if I ask you, raise your hands, how many here in this room know the name of the best teacher that ever had in your life? Raise your hand, please. Bingo. I've got to find those people. So, with that, let me do this. I've got wonderful bios of the panel. We're gonna go through CK's presentation, 4 imperatives, and entertain questions from you. And I'll start with Tony Cassiotti. Tony is right here. Tony is the Deputy CIO for Broward College, right here in the area. 35 years of IT experience. He also has held various roles at AT&T, Cisco Systems, Altran, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and NatWest Bank. Tony, thank you. We have Stuart Kippelman. Stuart is the CIO of Biotest Pharmaceuticals. Raise your hand. I'm sure we got the line, so it's good. So Stuart has served various roles as Senior Vice President CIO for Platform Specialty Products at Belmont Energy. Close and dear to me, he has won too many to name here awards from my former publications, Computer World and CIO. So Stu, thank you for joining us. Next, we have David Less, who's the CIO for JL Audio. He also has 30 years. We all kind of started the business together. We were way back when. Yeah, but I was kidding with somebody today. The pictures they have of me in the brochure, we used to call it the purple shirt picture at CIO magazine. That picture was taken in like 2000. So people come and say, oh, that's what Gary looks like. Look up, who is that guy? That's what Gary looked like in 1980. But David has 30 years of experience also. He's had versatile C-level experience focused on information technology, business process improvement, enterprise solutions, and held a variety of high-level interim CIO, CTO jobs, including the Senior Vice President CIO at Suntech Tech. Thank you, David, for joining us. And last but not least, on the far side, big grin on his face always, is Patrick Hale. Patrick is the Executive Vice President and CIO, how do you say that, Vitas Healthcare, which is the nation's leading provider of end-of-life care, which is so important. He's a youngster. He's only been in the industry for 25, so the young kid on the block. He was formerly Chief Technology Officer at Sparrow Health Systems and ranked by Information Week 500 in 2012 as one of the best CIOs in the country. So I've been coming to this event for a while, but I must say this panel is the best one that the group has put together. So it's going to be fun to start with you all. And I'd like to just get in it in terms of go down from Patrick down. Just give the audience a bit of context. Because how many here are on sell side? Vendors. Raise your hand. Okay, how many are practitioners? So it's about half and half. Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing, how many users you support, and what's your big initiative plan for 2018? Patrick?
So I'm in healthcare, so Vitas is a healthcare provider, as Gary said. We're the largest provider of hospice services in the country. So if I had to sum up what we're doing, for us, we call right now this digital transformation that we're all going through, we call it the whitewater. So whether you're talking about compliance or whether you're talking about technology innovation, our business is in the whitewater. When you're in the whitewater and you're traveling down the river very fast, there's no better opportunity to go faster and get further, and there's also no bigger risk than hitting a rock and losing everything. So it really is, for us, our main component, our main drive, we're doing some very innovative things around mobility, interoperability, and data analytics right now, which really, if I summed it up, is aimed at solving one simple thing that's a crisis in our country, which is the crisis that all this automation that's happening in healthcare, we've converted these EMRs, we've digitized the patient record, but we've done that at the expense of our clinical engagement at the bedside. So 50% of this nation's doctors categorize themselves as burned out. That means 1 out of every 2 doctors that you go to, that person's overly tired, they're not that engaged with you, and the number one reason they say why that is because of their technology. If you're talking to a doctor today, they say what we've succeeded in doing, in addition to lowering costs and making patients safer, is we've created the largest, most expensive data entry workforce the world has ever seen, and that's our doctors and our nurses. And so what we do at Vitas is we're trying to implement solutions, and CK mentioned this, that are mobile first, that replace the keyboard and the mouse with clicks and swipes, and that frankly allow our clinicians to set the damn device down and have a one-on-one interaction with their patients again.
Thank you, Patrick. Dave, tell us about the JLO.
I'm not nearly that exciting. Our products are. So JL Audio, I don't know how many of you have heard of us, extremely high-end, high-quality, highly engineered, mobile, marine, and home audio products. Really speakers and amplifiers. We're really tied into South Florida. We actually manufacture our speakers right here in Miramar. We have about 411 employees. We also have operations in Phoenix with electronics. And one more thing, we have more engineers than we do salespeople, so that speaks a lot about our product. Some of the folks here have had the opportunity to come to our factory and see what we do. So with that, we manufacture, we assemble, we machine parts, we use some robotics. The idea of robotics is interesting. We're doing some of that, but I didn't know it was called robotics. My biggest challenge, though, really designing, finding, and implementing applications that are going to allow us to be called future-proof. That's impossible. So sales order processing, manufacturing, engineering systems, vaulting our drawings, which there's so many patents on, but also enabling our representatives and salespeople and dealers around the world and giving them the tools they need to represent our products that really we need to listen to and understand. So it's a really interesting challenge. So that's what's in front of us. And everything CK says scares the crap out of me, to be honest. And I'm trying to get my head around it, but it also makes sense at the same time.
Well, fear is a powerful motivator for CK's business. How many here were pretty scared about some of the stuff that was out there? Yeah?
Be honest.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Stu, tell us what you do at Biotest.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone. So at Biotest, Biotest is a plasma donation center, and what they do is they take the plasma that's so critical to creating other drugs. It's a collection site, as well as we process and we do magical things that have plasma to turn it into a source product for other medications. They're very complex business. And the business is really a little bit of stereotypical IT, that they've kind of underfunded IT for a while through a number of company changes that have gone on. And we're really doing a complete transformation of the company led by IT. So we decided that the key to our success in the future is the experience the donors have when they walk into one of our centers and technology, right? So we're transforming everything from moving out of the data centers to the cloud. I expect to be 100% out of the data centers this year and have them shut down in just 12 months. From security, from a bit more mundane things like Office 365 and PC standards, simplification of documentation, of course, goes along with that, as well as implementation of laboratory systems and upgrades to really the ERP system of the centers, this software, very complex software that actually runs the donation process, moving everything to handhelds and to tablets versus PCs. And we're looking at a complete marketing transformation around, I have flipped on the switches and I'm collecting all of the geofencing and beaconing type of information, data. So I'm now collecting information I'm going to be able to mine and start looking at ways to improve the experience of the customers, to smooth out the amount of time that customers come into the center. So, you can dynamically give them $5 more per donation at an off hour, and take away $5 at a peak hour, to marketing campaigns, so we're really mobilizing that whole experience. Of course, overlaying security and compliance and regulatory on top of this is critical need, not just something we want to do, we have to do it. And we're really trying to drive the company into a direction that is best in class. Like we said, we think that the differentiation, there's a lot of plasma collection centers in the world, and we think that the differentiator is going to be how a user feels when they walk in our doors and how they feel as they touch and use technology. So the whole company's focused on it, and a lot of work to do.
Great, thank you. Tony, tell us what's going on in Broward.
Good morning, everyone. So Broward College is located right here in Broward County. We're spread over about 5 campuses. We're a rather large school. We have about 68,000 students. It's about the equivalent size of Penn State. Probably we're one of the top 10 schools in the nation in terms of size. Actually, Miami-Dade is the #1 college right down the road here. For a 2-year school, that is. We're also an Aspen finalist this year, which means we're rated 3rd highest college in the country. So it's a pretty difficult award to obtain, but we work really hard. So the things that these gentlemen were just talking about, all of our efforts are focused around student success. So we line up all of our IT initiatives to anything that's going to help students be successful. So whether that's using sensors in laboratories to make sure that the students are going in and out when they're supposed to, or to early warning systems. So we're going to be upgrading our website to do better tracking of where our students are going, where our recruits are coming from, how do we engage them. We're putting up a new call center where we'll be using a lot of artificial intelligence to offload some of those simple questions like, where is the central campus located? We don't really need humans to answer those types of questions. But we're also very interested in IoT, and we're putting in an infrastructure that's going to support beacon technology. What we found is that most of our students, our more successful students, visit our academic success centers. Those are defined as libraries, as laboratories, and their tutoring facilities. So we know what we've looked at a lot of data, we do a lot of data analyzation, and we noticed that most of our most successful students visit those tutoring centers very often. So what we like to do is tie from a mobile device, when a student walks into a library, we know that Johnny showed up and he's struggling in English. So all of a sudden we realize, okay, well Johnny's in the tutoring center and we do have an English tutor available. Why don't we send him a text message right to his phone and say, hey Johnny, you know you have a little bit of difficulty and there's someone available you can talk to. So those are some of the innovative thinking that we're trying to implement. Very difficult in a state agency. We are part of the Florida college system, where funding is very, very scarce. But we're, again, lining up all of our initiatives directly against what makes students successful.
We were talking before. Can you just briefly mention your certificate program? Your certificate program?
Yes. So we also know that the economy's real strong. Everybody knows that. There's a lot of jobs. People are just getting pulled off the sidewalk and brought into a job. Most of our students are adult learners. And we don't want them to wait 2 years to get their AA degree or AS degree and move on to a 4-year school. We're giving them certificates and badges along the way. As a matter of fact, Broward College issued more than 1,500 certificates last year. I think our closest competitor school is somewhere in the area of 300. So whether those certificates are in IT or logging time to fly an airplane, but most people do know there's a very large need for pilots. There's going to be a very large, you mentioned teachers, there's going to be a very large need for pilots coming down the road. So we're always issuing certificates or badges that allow a student to get a better paying job even before they finish their degree.
It's funny, Tony mentioned pilots. I fly often on JetBlue. So I was getting off the plane the other day in West Palm. I asked the pilot as I was getting off, just curiosity, how many minutes in this 3.5 hours did you or your co-pilot fly this Embraer? You go, 3.5. Well, that made me feel really good at 28. But it is what it is. I'd like to get into the first question from a macro sense. A colleague of mine, I've said it from the stage here over the years several times, John Gans had this theory that every 15 years, the wave of technology changes. So 1950s, mainframe, 65, mini, PC land in 80, the World Wide Web, e-commerce in 95, and of course cloud, anything as a service probably 2010. But in each of those tsunamis, so to speak, your colleagues back then only had to deal with one issue. As CK was walking us through you have digital permanent revolution, acceleration, constant learning curves. How are you dealing with all this change? How do you separate the noise from the signal? Who wants to take that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Every quarter, I actually do a lecture at Columbia in New York, and for graduate students coming out of the master's program. And they, the number one question to a CIO is, how do you keep up? Like, they're freaked out. They're completely freaked out about how do you keep up with the changing technology. And, my answer is they need to stop trying because there's no way you can do it. So
you don't give up. You just
you don't give up.
You go with the whitewater and just flow along.
Yeah, you clone yourself and exactly. And what I mean is that you look. When I grew up in IT, it was you kind of knew a lot about those things. So you knew how to code, you knew how to get the server set up, I grew up in IT. I probably had every role in IT over my career. And before CIO, I ran global infrastructure at Johnson & Johnson, with 120,000 PCs and 20,000 servers, very large scale. And even during that time, I kept VMware installed in my office to play with it and stay up to speed, and you still have the mindset of, I am able to keep up with all the change, all the different pieces happening. And then somewhere along the last 5, 6, 7 years, I would think that it got to a point where it's always been the case where you want to hire good people and surround yourself by good talent, but it really became the case where you had to accept as someone technical and someone who wanted to stay technical but also wanted to be in management, you had to accept that was no longer the case, that if you were the smartest person in the room, there was a serious and significant problem that you had. So it's not just surrounding yourself with the right people, but it is surrounding yourself with the right mentality that says whether you're going to prioritize the business and you're going to prioritize all the things that a CIO should be doing. A little less on what technology we're going to use and how we're going to use it. And then the most important point is that you also need to prioritize the technology itself. No matter how large your organization is, you can't adopt every new technology. You can't adopt every new category of software or service. You have to decide not just what the business priorities are, which we all do, but and not just what we're going to work on with the business priorities, but you also have to decide, for these 5 things, I'm not going to evaluate any new piece of technology. We just can't handle it as an organization. And I think that the last point is, with technology changing so rapidly, we have absolutely achieved the point that the business cannot absorb the change. So there's no matter how great a tool is that we want to roll out and think it's going to have the greatest ROI in the world, you just can't get it across the finish line because of the change management issues.
I think that's absolutely true. I think that's certainly true for us. That our CEO now has the difficult job of reining us in, right? But a couple things you said that I want to build off of, because I completely agree. I think when you're talking about the people and you're talking about this new requirement that we used to always. I entered this. I started my career on a help desk, and the same as you. I've been a developer. I've been a systems administrator, a database administrator. But our role then is much different than the role of our teams now. And I think part of our job as leaders is to kind of say, all right, let's not whinge and moan about the fact that the world's changed. It's much faster paced. The next generation of people that are coming into IT get it. They get it. And they don't have a lot of tolerance for moving and working slow. And so I think as leaders, what we do at VITAS is we set that tone, we set that pace. We're not going to to and fro over the fact that we've got so much complexity. We want to hire people who love that, who dive into that, who are what we call steely-eyed geeks, who really want to get into the bits and bytes of this and make things happen. And so that's part of this. You had asked to really, how do you separate signal from noise? So there's a lot of marketing hype and a lot of solutions, and there's a lot of solutions that are looking for a problem in your business. And to really take a look, what we try to do is there are business problems that as CIOs we have to align ourselves to. And there are a myriad of solutions to solve those business problems, but you have to start with the business problem. And part of that is, part of those problems are very difficult. Some of those problems are, how do you stay relevant in this new digital economy? How do you stay relevant in a healthcare economy now that is becoming more and more consumer-based and less referral physician-based? And so these are difficult questions where you have to start bringing up blockchain, you have to start bringing up RPA, and you have to move that company forward even when they are. I just had a conversation with my CEO a couple months ago where we're pulling the reins back on some change because we can now develop it a little faster than they can take it. But we can't ignore RPA. This is not something that we can ignore. So I think CK is very relevant. There are just some things that if we don't do it, somebody else will, and within a year or two we find ourselves in a competitive position that's untenable. And that's our job as CIOs, is to be the advocate at that table and say, I know you're having a hard time adopting, this is not an option, you gotta go.
This is well said. I'd like to get David and Tony in on this question before we go to the next one. Tony,
Yeah, we really do three things, and I mentioned one before. All of our IT initiatives are aligned to student success initiatives that are built into our strategic plan. So that's number one. Number two, we kind of reshaped and reorganized IT a little bit, where we actually took some of our technical folks and turned them into business relationship managers, and they work directly with all the different business units inside of the college to prioritize what they think is important. And then three, we do formally and informally get feedback from students all the time. Formally, we do it at our board meetings 4 times a year. And informally, we're constantly meeting with different student bodies to understand what they want, what they need out of the learning experience, and then we line up those IT initiatives to those.
Thank you, Tony. David?
So my world's just a little bit different again, but I want to talk about the ability for culture, your company's culture, to adopt what's next. If you're not cognizant of that and paying attention to it, a project will fail. Too slow, too fast. You always have to push. So push them a little bit, but you have to read when you're pushing them too far. For instance, we recently rolled out Office 365. For a lot of you, okay, big deal. For us it was. People are tied to their Apple Mail, they're tied to their whatever. They want to use Slack, they don't want to use Yammer, they don't want to use Skype, whatever. I really did it for a lot of different reasons, mostly collaboration. Well, everybody is giving me a hard time for the most part, but had to buy it from the top, and I knew it was the right thing for a lot of reasons. I won't bore you in details. But what started happening is that project built up inertia. Yesterday we had an all-company meeting off-site to talk about new products and this and that. People literally coming up to me and going, hey, that Skype for Business is awesome. I love Yammer. My email's so much better now. So you got to pick your, I'll say, fights, pick the right ones. And so that's kind of an easy one. The harder ones are the more complex business problems when you start rocking the world of what I'll call the historians of the company. So JL Audio is a company, like a lot, that have grown up, still privately owned, family-oriented, which is awesome, but also very complicated as an IT guy trying to change the landscape. I mean everything. So I'm now in the process of rolling out another collaborative effort with registration, warranty, inspection support that touches every part of the business, and by the way, crosses over to Phoenix and Miramar, electronics and speakers, where it's been a complete divide. And it's really interesting to see what happens. So back to the CIO role, you have to be a good salesperson, but that takes listening. Really paying attention to what people's objections are. Because if you just force it, it's going to fail. Understand what those objections are and figure out how to work with those people to show them what the solution will do. It won't always work out. Sometimes you do have to push hard, but that's one of the keys to the success of a successful implementation.
Staying on that sales angle, as you saw in the question, about half the folks in the room are on the sales side. So what can they do to make your lives
Can I jump in just for a second? So I'm in a position now where I have a small team and I'm relying on vendors and I'm reaching out to the folks that I've worked with in the past I trust. I think the single biggest problem, and I'm not trying to talk about anybody here, I might be, I don't know, sorry. Not listening. I've gotten as far with vendors where I've had to pull them aside and coach them on what I'm actually asking for and how to ask for it and take it back home to their bosses to bring back something. Because I really wanted their product, but I couldn't buy it. Are you kidding me? So my message is, try to listen, because the folks that do our job, or the buyers, they pretty much know the problem. They know the pain. Figure out how to help us solve it, and don't just tell us all about your product over and over again. How do we get through, how do we get to leveraging the product and making it work where I am or where your buyer is? That's key. And I get it, the energy of the solution and all the whiz bang, that's great. I called you because I got that. Let's figure out how we're going to make it work together.
Okay, so some heads nodding here. Anybody else want to jump in?
Yes.
Stu?
Yeah, of those that sell and make products, right? I have a challenge for you, right? So my daughter is 14, and when she gets into my car, she has an iPhone, and it takes about 7, 8 to 10 seconds in order for the phone to connect to Bluetooth before she can play the music, right? So whenever that happens, she says to me, "Phone's broken."
Well, that's what CK was saying.
Right? She'll keep, "Phone's broken, phone's broken." I don't get why it doesn't happen like that, right? So I wonder, how many of you have a child in that age range? 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, anyone in that range, right? Would they work at your company? They would? Would they use the technology that you're using today, like Windows? And sure, but reality is at the average company, well, the expense reporting system may not be there, and not every application, and we have to go back to Windows versus SAP, and and the blue screens, and blocking from the stopping them from getting to the internet for certain things they want to do. So if you just think about the world that we're in today, that we've created, I would argue to get the technology that we're using, like the geofencing and the fancy stuff, things have gotten much more complicated again. Like we go through these shifts over time where the software gets easier. Windows was, just picking a silly example, Windows was incredibly unrealistic to roll out and deploy, but we did it every time. Then they added a lot of tools that made it a lot easier, and then it's hard again to deploy because they added the capability, right? So there's this wave that goes on, but the average piece of software that we use that gets installed is still mighty complex to use. And I would argue that, and I'm being slightly sarcastic with it, but that our kids in 2 or 3 years that are in the ability to come, that do have the ability to come to the workforce, I would argue they wouldn't work in most of our companies because of the tools that we give them.
So it's actually really funny. I was at a nationwide conference last week where the CEO of BuzzFeed was talking, and one of the things he said that stuck with me was, if you want to know where technology is going, spend 3 hours with a 14-year-old girl. So that's probably it.
That sounds really dangerous.
Daughter. And he's got 1,000 examples as to why. That really is true, that there is a ubiquity of use and an ease of experience that certainly doesn't exist in healthcare. It doesn't exist in many industries right now, but that is the expectation.
And just one other thing on your point, that my 14-year-old, we have a kind of a shared office at home, and she will look at email and cannot wrap her head around email, right? So we all know that, right? So everyone's aware of that, right? Millennial email, it's just not going to work, right? So what's the solution? You're still deploying Outlook or Google. You're still probably 95% of your time in email. So we know it's coming, but we're really not doing anything about it. If my daughter started at my company today, culturally, she would have to sit on email for a long time. And it's
Snapchat for business.
It's not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen.
But
I'll break it down. Patrick's from 14 to 2, nearly 3. My grandson was visiting. We have a Jenn-Air oven. It's got the black glass. And his mother doesn't have that at their home in Connecticut. And when he was up last, he was moving his finger across the black glass. And he looked up and he goes, "Pop, no work." I kid you not. Before you get on the next question, just briefly, Shadow IT. I mean, you guys all have staffs. I mean, is that an accelerator or inhibitor or what with your efforts to digitally you live in this world. I mean,
Well, we don't have as much shadow IT as you might think inside college. Probably the biggest IT shop we have is the computer science department. They run their own organization. Corporate IT or enterprise IT doesn't take care of them. My boss has done a really, really good job of partnering with the business so that we bring solutions to their problems as opposed to letting them go out and buy something different. And every time they do try and buy something different, they normally wind up coming back and being pushed back through IT to make sure that that's a proper solution. So we're pretty lucky that way.
That's good. Anybody want to quickly comment? Because we've got about 10 minutes or so.
I'm a fan of Shadow IT. So I hate it when it happens because it means there was a failure on our IT team. But the honest to God truth is brilliance is where you find it in the organization. And there are teams that are within our company where there are people that are trying to find solutions and they're bringing different ideas than our people have. And so it does happen. It happens a lot. And when it does happen, they usually do come check with us. And I don't ever slow them down. If you think you have something that you can do and it fits within your budget and you want to give it a try, go ahead. Now that creates a lot of back end. Okay, it's out of control now. I had RPA is one of those things that I think we're going to be talking about big time Shadow IT 3 years from now. We have a company that started out with having 25 robots in the field, and the RPA technology like Blue Prism allows your teams, your business teams, to develop a robot that could log into your system.
RPA is robotic process automation, right?
Okay. And so that they can make that. They don't need an IT person to code anything. That's part of the big power of it. However, when you have thousands and thousands of robots taking automated actions, all of which you might not agree with, there comes a time when you have to get back to common principles of adoption, quality assurance, and rollout. And so we do have, with Shadow IT comes a whole lot of learning in the business units that's invaluable, and then ultimately usually ends up with some dissonance and then a control structure that we put over in IT.
So it's good stuff. I don't know if you've seen the Microsoft commercial with the kid at the end. It's an AI commercial from Microsoft. The kid goes, his head is exploding. Here's a fact, you guys got me thinking of it, that explodes my head. I was talking to Mark Weil, he used to work at IBM earlier today, and his colleague, a guy named John Patrick, came up with this thought a number of years ago, saying there's enough, think of IoT on this, there's enough individual IP addresses that we could literally put on every grain of sand on the planet. So 7 billion plus people ain't a problem. Before we move on, next question, just wrapping the vendor side here. Joe Tucci used to know Joe when he was at EMC. The thing that would drive him nuts when he went out to sales call with salespeople that are going to see you and buy this healthcare, and you would say, "Gee, I didn't know you sold that." That would just absolutely drive him nuts. And we used to have a seminar for tech salespeople, and what we would try to say to them is, sell aspirin, not vitamins. I.e., if I didn't take my vitamin D today, it's not too bad, but if I have a headache and if it goes, here's an aspirin, it's guaranteed to go away, you're not going to ask what the price is, you're just going to take it. But, just moving along briefly, outer net. Was that the first time you heard that term? What do you think? How are you all dealing with all these connected things? Is it disrupting your business model? Anybody?
It's the first time I've heard the term, but I think it is true. Some of the things that we're doing to kind of blur the edges between the virtual and the physical, probably this year we're trying to target a virtual reality pilot for our patients. So we have pet therapy and music therapy for terminally ill patients that is proven to reduce their pain scores. And it's really interesting to see now in a virtual world, when you can bring a virtual reality experience to a patient that's in pain, it can drop their pain scores by 50 to 75%. So they're now using this in EDs and pediatric wards across the country for children when they have to do an invasive procedure like a spinal tap. They'll put a VR set on them, etc. We're going to be piloting that, looking at that for, let's say a patient's last wish is to go back to the sunny beaches of California where they grew up. We can give them that experience, right? So we really think our chief medical officer and I are working with AT&T and other vendors that are going to be doing that over mobile devices here this year. So I do think that really is a thing, that this blurring of the internet coming into our physical world, and that the advent of 5G and mobile technology and mobile connectivity that's going to allow self-driving cars and massive amounts of data to traverse the cellular network in an instant. And that stuff, if you haven't seen that technology, that is seriously cool. 5G, the spectrum and the wavelength that they use will penetrate into the ground about 10 stories into the ground. So the days of you not getting the cell signal in the cinder block basement are almost gone. And the way that they're going to use microcells is just really, we are going to be a connected society here in this country in the next 2-3 years.
I live in a very remote town in Massachusetts. So how do you? When just amplify it a little bit there, Patrick. When's your sense that 5G, AT&T and others are talking about it? When will it be?
We'll have, AT&T and Verizon competed, and AT&T won what's called the FirstNet contract. If you're talking about rural areas, so every law enforcement agency, every first responder agency in the nation has spectrum bandwidth and towers across the country at 800 megahertz. And they're going to be hanging these 5G capable devices everywhere across the country over the next 3 to 5 years. So it is coming to a theater near you, and it's going to have wide expanse, even into areas that get no cell coverage today. So that's good news for America.
Well, what I've been doing the last 3 weeks, and I will continue, might not need your services at the company in a while. I started to meditate for 10 minutes a day. It's the hardest thing I've tried to do. It really is. But when you start with all the stuff we've got on our pockets and you can feel, the tension go out of your face. But anyway, anyone else want to comment on out-of-net before we get to cobots and blockchain?
I think I mentioned before the student experience walking into one of our centers, but also from a physical plant perspective, our biggest expense is electricity here in South Florida to cool our buildings. So we're looking to put in a lot more beacons and a lot more IoT into building maintenance just to reduce our costs.
My son-in-law works for Pratt & Whitney. They used to lease or sell, let me get this right, they used to lease their engines until they started embedding thousands and thousands of sensors in the engine. Because then they go, wait a second, I can lease these now to JetBlue. And I'm getting all the information. And it just totally flipped their business model. Okay, robots, cobots, no bots. David, what's your sense? Are they going to be collaborative, or do you think robots and RPA and smart machines are going to replace humans at work?
I don't think replace. I agree with CK that from the world I'm in, see an opportunity for what I'll call collaboration. So when I go out to our distribution centers, try to put away cake, run the forklifts, you can run all that dark, and let the humans make the other decisions and be the business owners, so to speak. We do have some robotics, but a lot of what we do is really the human on the line building the product, and what's baked into that is, yes, it's manual, but the quality control aspect of it, which we find hard to replace. There's also a cost perspective, right? So I think in our world, we may see some opportunity there, but the cost of the robot itself versus having the human touch and QA. So I'm not sure in the applications that I'm involved in now, but I can certainly see in other businesses that I've been a part of, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well said. Anybody else want to briefly comment on that?
I think it's here to stay. I think it's not just in terms of manufacturing equipment. So one of the ways we're using it, and this was a shadow IT thing, by the way, that we have a really brilliant gentleman that came up with this, how to do this. But so labor in our business is a big deal. We're a $1.3 billion business. $800 million of our cost is labor. So we swing labor 2% or 3%, that makes our fiscal year or breaks it. So one of the things that we do in our programs all throughout the country is we watch, we have labor reports to make sure that we're staffed to take care of all the patients that come on board. It's a highly variable workflow, so we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, so we have to react in real time to what happens when a patient needs our services. And so these labor reports are kind of the lifeblood of the people that run the businesses across the country. And what this gentleman did was he used an RPA tool to quickly scan those labor reports and disseminate it out and said, okay, on your labor report, these are the items. You don't have enough nurses on Saturday at 3 p.m. So you have to look at that. He just disseminated a robotic process to read through these labor reports and just call out 4 or 5 things of the 72 data elements that are in that report. I mean, it's a long report. To call it out and say, hey, pay attention to these 6 or 7 things. And then he sent it out in an email, and he created a fake email account. The name was Brian, I forget the last name. But I started getting all these reports about how great Brian is. Like, they love this guy, who's not a guy. It's a robot. So when you talk about robotic process engineering, there are 100 things. This is probably saving about 15 hours a week for our general managers nationwide, that they just don't have to cull through a ton of data. It calls out what they need to pay attention to and take action on. And so we're going to be building on that going forward. But there's 100,000 of little processes in every one of our companies that are just like that, that are things, you know, when CK says we really, you know, we have to start thinking about that, thinking about blockchain. It's another foundational technology that really, it has great utility. It can change the world, right? You see a lot of predictions that world economies are going to change because of blockchain. I don't know if that's true, but I do know that there's a fundamental for shared ledger technology. There are use cases in your company that make a lot of sense to help you do business and be more competitive.
Thank you, Patrick. Anybody else want to comment on blockchain? Stuart?
I could argue both sides of it. It's a new technology. We see shifts from technology to technology over the years. There is some unique benefits to blockchain. I think that it will find its place, whether in 2 years we'll be running, monetary through it is another question I doubt. I hope not. I hope not yet. I did spend $200 on a coin, a Bitcoin that is worth 110 now.
A couple of months ago, it was probably worth 300,000, right?
Yeah, somewhere around there. So that's my expertise on cryptocurrency.
Well,
but yeah, I mean, I think it's going to change, and if we will adopt it, it's not a matter of if, it will become an important technology and kind of the IT toolkit. But I don't see it replacing SQL or Oracle, unfortunately. So.
Thank you, Stuart. I just want to see if Tony, if you got any courses on blockchain at the university, at the college?
No, we're not teaching any blockchain courses just yet. But I think we haven't spent a lot of time thinking about blockchain. But as I'm sitting here and listening to CK, security is one of my everyday nightmare. I think we could probably start thinking about using blockchain to secure student records and financial aid data, those type of things that have to be highly secure.
It's kind of like, for me anyway, it's like the web was. We were talking about Tim Berners-Lee. This is like 95, just before Netscape went public. And you go to conferences like these and people are talking about HTML and hyperlinks and we're going, what is this? But anyway, one skill I did see someone talk about at a conference a couple of weeks ago about blockchain, if you're looking to hire people in that technology area, is the candidate have an immutability, respect for the immutability of data, and trust and honesty is key. So with that, Patrick Kale, David Less, Stuart Kippelman, and Tony, I got it right here. Tassiotti. Thank you so much, and thank you to the audience, and we'll bring it back up.
And a big hand for Gary, don't leave yet. He has a collection of these at home. He said he uses them as gardeners, I think, I'm not sure. He's like garden gnomes. Anyway, big hand for Gary Beach, who has been here, I think, 9 years now. honoring this. We appreciate it. This is a little token of our appreciation. Thank you so much. And Tony C is just the easiest way to say it. So Tony, this is for you. Thank you very much. And Stuart, Patrick, and Dave. Before we let you go, thank you to the panelists. We'd also like to thank all of our volunteers. Thank you, volunteers. Our CIO board and members that made this year's event a resounding success. Really quickly, with the passing of Stephen Hawking, his passing has left an intellectual vacuum in his wake, but it's not empty. Think of it as a kind of vacuum energy permeating the fabric of space-time that defies measure. Stephen Hawking, R.I.P. So, said well, again, big hand for our students.